Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of the Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by fly tyer and Riverkeeper Fletcher Sams. We take a deep dive into shoal bass, Fletcher's fly designs, and his work protecting central Georgia waters. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And we're excited to partner with our friends at Jesse Brown's Outdoors to bring the Chocolate Factory to Charlotte on May 4th. Blaine will be teaching private tying classes, discussing predator and prey, and sharing his favorite rod, reel, and line combos. Check out the link in the show notes for more details. Now, on to our interview. Well, Fletcher, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Thanks for having me. Very excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and it's kind of ironic that two Southerners have to go all the way to Ypsilanti, Michigan, to meet each other in person.
Yeah, that was quite the show.
Yeah,
sure.
And it's kind of funny too. I was explaining to people, I was like, there was this whole like Southern predator angler scoff posse up there.
Yeah. It's we carpooled up, believe it or not, at least half of us. So it's been a really cool show, lots of relationships, that you meet on social media, but then, now you have like real in contact stuff with them. And so, that's been super cool. Especially meeting folks like Chase Smith in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And, so Fletcher, we have a tradition. I know you're a listener, so the tradition is we like to have all of our guests share their earliest fishing memory.
So, my earliest fishing memory that's like really super burned into my brain is, at a young age, my family was super close, and I grew up like a mile down the road from my cousin Jimbo, and Jimbo and I fished his dad's bass pond, and maybe the biggest fish in there was half pound. And we would go out there with jitterbugs and beetle spins and just have a blast. And, that's kind of what I thought fishing was. And it was a great time. But then my dad took me to this farm pond down the road. And you kind of have those fish that haunt you. And this was the first fish that really haunted me. And I, just kind of went down there knowing what I knew, and tied on a jitterbug, threw it out, and started reeling it back in, and it got kind of underneath the branch, and I thought that I was going to get snagged, so I went a little bit faster, and it just looked like a toilet flushed right there in the stick, and it was probably 5 or 6 pounds, but as a kid, I thought it was 20 pounds, and it jumped out of the air straight in the hook and flew off, and just totally distraught, and my dad had to calm me down and everything like that. But that's my earliest burned in fishing memory.
Yeah, that's pretty neat. So when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
So on a trip my grandparents took Jimbo and I out on this trip of a lifetime, when I think that I was, say, 10, and Jimbo's probably 12 or 13. And they took us out to the Middle Fork of the Salmon out in Idaho. And we did a float for, I think it was 7 days. And, Jimbo was getting ready to go, and, getting all the stuff that he wanted to take, and he was going to try fly fishing. And of course, have to do what my big cousin is doing. And so begged for a fly rod to take from my mom and dad, and they got me one. Went out there, and it was just dry flies for really big cutthroat, and this was back in early 90s, and it was just awesome. It was the coolest thing, and I was terrible angler, but was able to catch fish, and that was the first foray into fly fishing. And when I got back home, was kind of, in this trout snob mode. And then I kind of started trying to trout fish up in the North Georgia mountains, and it was crowded creeks, nymph fishing, and it wasn't for me. And so I kind of dropped it for a long time. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I picked it back up.
Yeah, very, very neat. And the rest, of course, is history. You got a little bit of water under the bridge since then. And, who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey, and what have they taught you?
You know, I live in, middle Georgia. There's no fly shops around or anything like that. The closest one we have is an excellent fly shop called the Fish Hawk. And, the one mentor, I guess that's been kind of constant in my life is this guy named Rob Smith. Everyone knows him down here as Mustache. And if you don't know Mustache, you need to know Mustache. He has no social media presence whatsoever. But everyone knows him. And I remember when, I went in and decided that I was doing a lot of duck hunting at the time, and wanted to bring a fly rod with me for, after the morning was kind of done. We were out in the boat and redfish were around and wanted to kind of get into it, and went in with the intention of buying a redfish rod. And, Rob kind of, gave me a little refresher and got me all set up. And as that kind of progressed into bass fishing, Rob was always there to kind of steer me in the right direction, not necessarily like spending time with me on the water as a mentor or anything like that. But, he is always somebody that I really look to help me problem solve problems with my casting, my understanding how to fight fish, that kind of thing. But by and large, the fun thing to me about fly fishing, as far as how I got into it and how I learned, was really trying to figure it out for myself, and kind of surrounding myself with fishing buddies that liked figuring things out themselves. And you met some of those guys that came up to Michigan, Adam Smith and his brother Travis Smith, and Seth Clark, and we all just kind of nerd out about fly fishing and trying to solve different problems, and really just kind of feeding off of the problem solving aspect of fly fishing, and figuring it out for yourself makes it a lot more rewarding experience, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is interesting because I know we were talking up in Michigan too. That's probably how you've kind of, not to you, but to a lot of people, have started chasing kind of edge species on the fly. And, everybody that I talk to that fly fishes in Georgia, they're absolutely nuts about shoal bass. And, for folks that aren't familiar, you want to kind of give folks kind of an overview of what a shoal bass is?
Sure. I think most of your listeners living outside of the Southeast, kind of tend to think of bass as largemouth, smallmouth, maybe spotted bass. And there's 19 species that have been delineated of black bass that you can go catch today. And Georgia has 12 of those. And out of the 12, the shoal bass is very unique in a lot of different ways. It's a habitat specialist, first of all and foremost. There's a reason it's called a shoal bass, and that's because they live in this what we call fall line habitat, heavy current, rock, rapids, for lack of a better description. And these fish require that for spawning habitat. And if you impound the stream that they're in, they're not going to survive. They do not do well with impoundments at all, versus, say a smallmouth or a spotted bass, which is kind of more of habitat generalist. They'll kind of be all over the place. They'll make huge movements, up and down, 100 mile plus movements, migrating, every year between, where they, in most of the year. And then when they come up to spawn, to look at one, it's apparent that they're very different if you had both of them in your hand. But I'd say that the coloration most resembles a smallmouth bass. They have vertical barring, going down the body, kind of an olive back, and a yellowish, light olive, side flank, and a pretty white belly. And they have this big black spot typically on their tail, and their fins are almost like a mauve color. And the other distinguishing thing from smallmouth would be that their mouth is almost as big as a largemouth, very, very large mouth, and proportionately their tail is not as big as a smallmouth bass. And where they live for a good part of the year is in tiny little current breaks inside the heaviest current that they can find. And that's how they largely ambush food, is in and out of tiny current breaks when stuff washes down. They can get fairly large. The Georgia record, I believe, is 8 pounds 4 ounces, and it was tied 2 years ago. And they only native to one specific drainage, the Apalachicola Chattahoochee Flint drainage. That the Chattahoochee forms part of the border from Alabama and Georgia and kind of flows out the Apalachicola to the Gulf of Mexico. And then the Flint forms around the Atlanta airport and comes down through Albany and meets the Chattahoochee and Lake Seminole. And that is their native range. In the 70s, they were stocked in the river that I work in, the Ocmulgee River in the Altamaha system. And the native bass at that time in the Ocmulgee were a strain of red eye called the Altamaha bass and largemouth. And these days in the shoal habitat, the largemouth are incredibly rare, and there are no pure Altamaha red eye. These fish immediately took over everything. So that's kind of what they look like and kind of where they live. But they are habitat specialists, and they have to have that shoal habitat in order to survive.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, maybe unlike smallmouth bass, you kind of have to target them like you're fishing pocket water, right?
Yeah. Yes and no. I mean, they will be kind of in more open water. They will hang out in pools. And, I'm sure a lot of your listeners are listening to this and say, smallmouth bass hang out in that kind of habitat in my neck of the woods. And sure, they can be in that kind of general area. But I think the thing that's really bizarre when people, experienced anglers, come down and try for the shoal bass is how much current they will be in. People try to make them analogous to trout and all this other stuff, and it's really just its own thing. And because a lot of this habitat is pocket water, troughs, ledges, high current, wood, rock, all this stuff, it's challenging to get your bait where you need it to go.
Yeah. And so I guess, does that mean that you generally are fishing, opting for like a streamer presentation over like poppers and sliders and things like that?
There are, in the summer, poppers can be a really good, fun way to do it. You can fish, big nips for them. That can be fairly effective if you can get heavy enough. But for me, the streamer fishing thing is the river that I'm in, unfortunately, runs exceptionally, unfortunately, from a fishing standpoint, runs exceptionally clear almost all the year. And we just have super high visibility. And from a fishing standpoint, I don't really have a lot of patience for nymphing or dry flies or even poppers. I love animating a fly and I love seeing them eat. And this fish is almost 100% piscivorous after they're 12 inches long. So all they eat is fish, pretty much. And so my favorite way to target them is totally with a streamer. And if you see me out on the water with a bobber on, I am having a really awful bad day.
and we'll talk about this when we get to fly design, because I know from talking to you in Michigan at Bob in the Hood that you've got some really kind of unique approaches to the way you like to design and fish streamers that are kind of unconventional for kind of what I think of as kind of traditional predator streamer folks. But, on the tackle side, are you fishing those with 6 and 7 weights on like floating and intermediate lines? I mean, kind of what's your tackle setup?
So, shameless plug for Schultze. That swim fly rod that he developed, I've got 4 or 5 of them, and all 8 weights. And the 8 weight thing really kind of evolved, not necessarily because of the fish, but because of the flies. Because they have such a big mouth, we're throwing fairly large flies, up to 12 inches long. And so having the ability to quickly switch to a fly that's that size, it helps to have the extra beat. The other thing is, these fish can live in really small, really, crowded canopy little creeks, and being able to roll cast a decent sized streamer, it helps to have the 8 weight. And most people, at least most people that I fish with 8 weights.
Got it. And so that for folks that don't know, that's a Loomis stick. And I'll try to drop a link to it in the show notes. And are you then fishing a floating line or intermediate? I mean, what do you like to do?
So, when I first started to really get serious about, tying and doing all this stuff for shoal bass, I was essentially trying to copy Mike Schultz's program of kind of breaking down the water column and having it situational to water temps, and kind of through the whole thing. I've got full sink tips, all this stuff. And when we're fishing out of a boat, we'll have 7 rods in the raft, and it's almost like we're the glitter boat guys, just picking up a different setup and throwing it. But, it's kind of evolved over time. At least my program, what I run, is really kind of simplified and specialized into a floating line program primarily. And a large reason that I'm doing a floating line kind of based program these days is I really like targeting these fish on foot. So I'm wade fishing most of the time, and really the only time that I'm bringing any kind of sinking line is when I'm in a boat. And we fish a lot with conventional guys, trying to learn what they're doing and how the fish are reacting to the different baits. And one thing that I feel like you can replicate a lot of the stuff that spin fishing guys and conventional tackle guys are doing. But the one thing that you're really able to do that they're not able to do so well is like the floating line presentation. It's just really hard for conventional guy to do, like a grease line swing, for instance. And so, I feel like because of the clear water, I've kind of developed my flies to all be fished on a floating line.
Got it. And I would imagine you probably, given if they're fishing in structure, you're probably almost all fluorocarbon, right?
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot for me to go under like 20 pounds.
Yeah. And so, I know from looking at your Instagram feed that there's some other species you like to chase on the fly too. You want to share those with our listener?
Yeah. So, in Georgia, we do have 12 different species of black bass. And my other favorites to fish are what we call the red-eye clade. And that's 7 different species. Some are only found in Alabama, some are only found in Georgia and South Carolina. And because we're so geologically old down here in the Southeast, we have all these isolated drainages, and so you have all this speciation down here. And if you're not familiar with the red-eye species, they don't get very big. Like, let's say a 12-inch fish is like equivalent to a 19, 20-inch smallmouth, right, as far as trophy size. But they are incredibly colorful. They have some of the species have really bright red fins or orange fins or yellow fins, and they look like Smurfs part of the year, just totally blue, bright blue coloration on the face and the bellies. And they live in a lot of places that you would think are like brook trout streams. And those are fun for me to kind of target. And, really I like doing that because it's kind of a solo thing, or maybe you and one other person, and you will definitely not see anyone else out in most of the places that you're going to go target those fish. So really rugged, really remote. And, if it was a trout stream, it would be packed, but you got the whole thing to yourself. And so, those species in general have a special place in my heart because, the fly that, the first fly that I named, was really originally to target that specific, clade of species. And it was really kind of a technique specific thing that kind of led me to them. And, outside of the red-eye bass, I am really, really into fishing for bowfin and striped bass. And those fish are also kind of special to me because the bowfin have really shown me a lot about fly durability, material selection, those kind of things. And same thing with the striper. I mean, a lot of the striper fishing we do is kind of targeted when they're acting like shoal bass, or sometimes while we're fishing for shoal bass, they'll be bycatch, but they're not small fish. And the lessons learned on fly durability from them, have kind of changed the way that I've kind of gone about building flies too. So we kind of tend to do a little bit of everything except for trout fishing. So it's kind of come full circle back to, what interested me as a little kid, which is bass stuff.
Yeah. And then, I'll drop this in the show notes, but, folks should check out your Instagram feed because there's some absolute hogs for stripers in your Instagram feed. It's kind of crazy, really.
Yeah. And, going back to Mustache at the Fish Hawk, I've kind of gotten to the point now where I don't post fish pictures anymore because it's hard not to burn spots and stuff with those pictures. So kind of cooling it on posting any more of those for at least a little bit.
Yeah, well, there you go. And so, we've kind of danced around the fact that you tie flies. How did you get interested in tying flies?
Probably 10 or 12 years ago, my parents took a fly tying class, and they really got into it, and, for a little bit, and they thought that it would be something that I was interested in because I was kind of starting to fly fish and everything like that. And of course I was like that like arts and crafts. I don't need to do that. I just want to buy the flies and go out there and fish. And so, after a couple of years of it, the vise and the little, combo pack of materials sitting in the closet, I had a pretty frustrating day shoal bass fishing where I could not get a fly deep enough to hit where I wanted to hit in the hole. And so I dragged that thing out of the closet and, pulled up somebody's YouTube tutorial on how to tie a clouser and bought the heaviest tungsten eyes that I could and, a bucktail, and started spinning them up. And it's kind of been an obsession ever since.
Yeah. So, what do you tie on today?
I think I started with a peak, and, kind of wore it completely out. And these days I primarily tie on a Renzetti.
Gotcha. And what's your favorite flavor there?
It's just a saltwater traveler. I've worn out a couple of jaws, and the thing about the saltwater traveler is I really don't need for the flies that I tied, like, true rotary function or anything fancy like that. I just the arm design on the Renzetti allows me to get a little bit more purchase on shanks. And so that's primarily the reason that I really like that vise.
Got it. Yeah, I've got two of them. I'm left-handed, so I had one for back in the old days when we didn't work from home. I had one for the office and one for the house, and now they're both in the office at home.
Yeah, and now my daughter is showing interest, so she's using an old peak time with me. So
yeah, that's pretty cool. And so, who are some of the tyers that have kind of influenced your development over the years?
That's a really long list. I think if you look at my page, it's very obvious that Blaine Chocolate's a huge influence, but I didn't start tying changer style flies for a few years. It kind of started out with classics, Bob Clouser, some Popovich flies like hollow flies, and then, lefty deceiver, double deceivers, that kind of thing. And really it was kind of around the double deceiver that I started looking at, the stuff that Madden was doing with a peanut or, articulated flies, and really started looking at what Gallup was doing with the extended body articulated fly and all the variation that he was doing with, that kind of body design to get the length with these natural materials that he wanted to get. And, same thing with the extended body concept on the beast fly with Popovich. And, the way that I really started looking at these articulated extended body kind of flies was, in my brain, it's all different styles to kind of accomplish the same basic idea, which is, on a single hook streamer, I was only able to get so long. And by adding the extended body, tail, articulation, whatever you want to call it, you're able to get a much bigger bait, but on top of that, you're able to get the movement in it. And so, I would say that Popovic's, Madden, Blaine, are all huge influences, but then there's also like conceptual stuff that I like to take, in other words, I don't tie their patterns, but I really like the ideas behind their patterns. And like Mark Sadati with the weight balance principle. I really try to build my flies in a way that they are weight balanced. That's not always possible. But I like to have weight balanced flies in my box so that I can hunt all day on a new river. And so, I'm not all out there tying Sadati slammers, but that concept that he brought, I really, really adhere to that. Andy Sabota with the Swimmy Jimmy. It's one of my favorite flies of all time. But again, it's going back to the extended body thing. My favorite way of tying any kind of extended body fly is doing it with a game changer platform. And I think that it allows me to use materials in a way that the fly looks more realistic, in my opinion, and less suggestive. And because I fish a lot of really clear flows, trying to take flies from a suggestive standpoint to a more realistic standpoint, but not really losing action, gaining action, that kind of thing. I think that the shank based bugs are really kind of where I'm totally adherent to, the game changer platform pretty much. I do tie some single articulation flies, but even those, it's not using a wire and a bead. It's connecting them with shanks and really kind of going back to some durability stuff from the bowfin, the pickerel, and the big striper is a lot of the wire connection, a lot of this stuff. It'll put your tackle to the test. And so, even on the single articulation flies, I'm articulating it with shanks just from a durability standpoint.
Got it. And it sounds too like, given the species that you like to chase on the fly, that you didn't really kind of, you didn't start tying pheasant tails and then get to predator flies. It seems like you were kind of predator flies out of the gate, right?
Yeah, pretty much. That was, it was like, hey, Rob, what a bass eat, and showed him a little box of, some nymphs and stuff like that I was trying to fish with, and mustache was like bigger, and once I saw a fish eat a streamer for the first time and how aggressive it was, I was hooked. I didn't want to do anything else ever.
Yeah. And, so for folks that aren't, familiar with your patterns, kind of let us, know some of your, more notable patterns and kind of, how they fish and kind of what they're geared towards.
Like I was saying, the first pattern, that I really named, and I guess what most people know me for is what I call a tweaker. And, the idea for the tweaker kind of evolved out of red-eye bass fishing. And another one of my favorite flies is Blaine chocolate pattern, the bugger changer. When I don't know the story, but originally when he designed that fly, it was a tail hook fly, and then there's some issues, and there's a change to one shank back on that fly, with the head just kind of not floating, but lead eye head with a little bit of brush, and that thing will jig all the way down to the bottom. And it's a great fly. It's one of my favorite flies of all time. But when I'm red eye bass fishing, it's hard to roll cast that thing. effectively. And so I really wanted to figure out a way to, just tie essentially the same bug, but have a bug with less heavy lead eyes. And the way I was trying to do that was just tying them with a deer hair head and having the deer hair kind of provide buoyancy that would keel it in addition to a little bit of weight. And so instead of tying them with, like, say, medium eyes, I'm tying them with extra small eyes and deer hair. And they were great red eye bass flies. And also changed to a really light wire hook, and being able to roll cast that thing in those red eye creeks was great. And, caught a ton of fish on it. But the thing that I really kind of noticed in fishing that version of the fly a lot was, and I guess talk about this in a little bit, but I was not really great with deer hair when I started tying that bug, and had a lot of variations to, how I was carving the head. And noticed on the heads that I was tying more like a Gallup Nancy P, like really tall heads instead of really wide heads. That the fly was super weedless, like throw it in a weed bed, drag it out, throw it in a brush pile, drag it out, and never really getting snagged. And what was happening was the hook point was kind of floating back behind the head. And when a fish would bite it, of course, had plenty of hook back there. But because the deer hair head was more buoyant than the hook point would float ever so slightly behind the head while it was traveling through the water. And so decided that because it was so weightless, man, this thing is going to be a great shoal bass fly. And the shoal bass would eat the hell out of it, but almost every fish would straighten these little light wire hooks out. And so we started tinkering with it a little bit more, adding more weight to the head, and trying to go to heavier gauge hooks. But we would lose the weedlessness because the hook would just kind of flop to the side. The head would keel, but this heavy gauge wide gap hook would just kind of fall to the side. And one of the mods that we made to it to really kind of keel it was adding a little bit of weight to the hook to keel it. And the really crazy thing about the final design is, it's still weedless, got a beefy hook on it. It's gonna hold any bass species that you're gonna want to hook on it. And it's because of the weight in the back of the hook. If you're familiar with like a yard sale supply that Matt Grajewski ties, he weights the back of the hook, and that's really what kind of provides the glide and the jerk, showing profile on that fly. And what happens when you just kind of pop this fly is the belly will roll almost above sideways and flash like crazy, and it will show like T-bone kind of profile every time you're stripping it. And so having that action at the way that we fish this fly, especially for shoal bass, is a pretty unconventional way of fishing. And it's a boat fly. The majority of the way that we fish that fly, we do sometimes use it weighting, but it's primarily a boat fly. And there are lots of these pockets that are up on the bank, and a lot of them have wood and all kinds of other stuff and a lot of high flow. And we will put on a really heavy gauge really long, like 10, 11 foot floating line leader. And we'll throw this up on the dry bank and drag it down into these bankside pockets on the really clear, low flow days, and try to make reaction bites happen, right? Because otherwise it's kind of having a tough day. And so it's manufacturing reaction bites. But we're casting up onto dry land and dragging this thing into not near structure, into structure, and hauling fish out over structure. Fish will climb up over dry branches, chasing this thing down. Just a really, really cool fly and a really cool way of fishing. But it's, kind of the first named fly, I guess, that I did. And we have a ton of fun with that bug, but it's a really specialized bug as far as, like any weedless fly, you're going to decrease your hookup percentage somewhat. And so for fishing open water near structure, we like to fish other bugs. But if we're tweaker fishing, there's no better way to do it than with a tweaker. And it's, we don't do it with other flies. It's kind of its own little sunny, bright summer day fishing program.
Very, very neat. And also, too, talk to our listeners a little bit. You were showing me some game changers that you tied that kind of had a spoon face on them that actually were fished kind of parallel to the water surface instead of perpendicular. And you were telling me that was also for a shoal bass presentation.
Yeah. That is, I kind of tend to break my flies into different categories. And that's probably the most versatile fly in my box. If I'm fishing an area that I'm not too familiar with, I can make long reaching casts and, swim it back like any streamer over a long distance, trying to elicit a strike over terrain that I'm not sure about. Or you can just kind of toss it in a hole in one specific zone and twitch it around and work. But it's kind of a more wide, more flat kind of profile is what we were kind of ended up with, of a Andy Sabota Swimmy Jimmy. And we're tying it on a game changer body, and we're trimming the body where it has, instead of a vertical profile, it's got a horizontally wide profile, and it looks like a dying baitfish up on the surface, and kind of swims sideways depending on the presentation. It's if you can, if you're, a lot of people fish Andy's fly on sinking lines, but for me, I like fishing on a full float and a long leader, and I will typically use it to fish one zone and dive down into that zone or into that pocket or into that shelf, and then up over the next little shallow portion and back down into another bucket or hole in these giant shoal complexes. And it allows me to cover a lot more water than, say, like a deceiver or something like that, that's a regular hook down fly. That's, once I get it in the water, it's just going to kind of maintain depth. This thing, I can dive and then hover over obstructions and then dive down into the next hole. And that really, we fish a bunch of dams in the state, and sometimes you'll have shad come through the turbines. And if you've ever seen that, those fish, when they're kind of knocked out, still alive, they're kind of up on the surface. They're sideways, they're flat, and when they are trying to resuscitate themselves, they'll kind of dig down and then, kind of pause and just kind of shimmy, float up, back up to the surface and repeat that. And this fly really mimics that super wounded baitfish kind of activity, but you don't have to swim it like that. If you fish it on a 45 downstream out of a boat, for instance, the fly will right itself, so to speak, where it looks like it's keeled vertically, and it kind of will jerk up current and then show profile down, jerk up current and show profile down on the pause. It will do a whole lot of things, but I don't really take credit for that because I'm just, trying to mash up a longer, extended, more realistic version of Andy's fly by putting Blaine's body on it. But yes, that is one of my go-to favorite flies for any species. If I am trout fishing, that's my number one bug.
Got it. And so, any other, flies, even if they're not, we'll say, Fletcher originals, or techniques you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah. So, there's another bug that we've been fishing for a couple of years now, that I call the quackhead. And, it's kind of trying to be a habitat specialist for these shoal bass is where it started. And when Blaine came out with his jerk changer, awesome swimming fly, and it's great, and we still use that for shoal bass. But there are a lot of places where I could not get that fly more than a couple of inches under the water in some of these really fast pockets. And I wanted to have something that was able to have a similar action, yet get down deeper. And the other thing that, going back to the realistic version of the flies, I really wanted to be able to, put eyes on it and have the ability to use natural materials and add colors and stuff like that I wanted for the clear flows. And so took some of the things that I learned about fly design from messing with a tweaker, like the belly flip on the strip, and a couple of things like that. And this fly is a very thin profile. It's only got a couple of articulations out of the back, and it's tied on either a really long, kind of, I think it's a TP 615 Air-X hook, which is a 3X long streamer hook, and half of the fly is hook, and that kind of gives it that jerky kind of movement. But the way that I weight it and the way that the wing of the fly is kind of inverted, where the belly of the fly is the wing, when you strip this thing, it'll show a whole lot of belly, and kind of carve almost like a 360 while it's showing belly. It's a pretty wild fly, but you can also walk the dog and it'll punch down and get pretty deep pretty quick on the pause. So trying to accomplish a lot of what Grajewski was doing with the yard sale, and kind of the concepts of waiting with the wing and the belly flip with the tweaker and a lot of the action out of a jerk changer is kind of where that fly idea came from. And it's a super cool fly. And now that Airex has come out with that new Beast long hook, which is proportionately the same hook as that trout predator hook, it has become a awesome striper fly too. We could not hold the stripers with the TG hook, so had to work on that one a little bit. But that's another cool fly. And then the newest fly that we're messing around with, going back to my obsession with this sideways baitfish fly, is what we're calling a swim bow fly. Kind of named it after my cousin Jimbo, because it's, getting on that jitterbug thing as a kid. I just cannot get over the topwater bite. And, that's kind of the closest thing that I'll get to using a topwater fly, or those swimmy Jimmy flies. But I wanted to be able to tie a bigger bug that I could get a hen saddle to get the body the way that I wanted it to look. And so started messing around with trying to make a synthetic version with foam. And going back to Sadati's weight balancing principle, that fly's got a whole lot of drag, and because it's got a whole lot of foam on it. And we're heavily weighting those flies and putting a lot of foam on them, which seems kind of odd. But the reason we're weighting them is, one, they're on a bent shank hook, like a TP 650 for smaller fish, and then we're bending SA 292s with a blowtorch to do striper versions, like really, really big versions. But the principle is more or less the same. You're getting a diving fly, got a big rattles in them that we're tying on with heat shrink wrap, and a really realistic looking painted head on this foam, and does almost everything that this swimming Jimmy fly does, but harder. It swims up harder, it dives harder, swims more. Just a really, really cool bug. And because it's got rattles built into it, it is just something that fish can absolutely not ignore. It's a bug that can suck to throw all day, even though it is weight balanced. It's you're hucking a whole lot, but once it's in the water, it's really hard for a fish not to kill that thing. And those are the kind of the bugs that are named bugs that we tie, but we still fish a whole lot of brushhead game changers, hybrid game changers, jerk changers. We'll fish a lot of Chuck Craft flies. We will still fish a whole lot of Clousers, and the other flies that we fish a bunch are Fisher Rats flies. And, yes, we do fish some pole dancers, but he's got a fly called a spot on baitfish, and it's a really flat single fly with, and we tie him with a ton of weight. And that is really, when we're trying to hit bottom, that's what we're using. But, our fly boxes are kind of getting smaller as far as the number of patterns, as we, kind of dial in this floating line program. It's my box is really looking like, bugger changer tweaker, a swimming Jimmy, a spot on baitfish, and maybe a couple of other things if I'm really particular about whatever fishery that I'm in. And it's really kind of simplified the way that I fish, because it's kind of limiting my options. And so these days the patterns are kind of getting fewer, and the colors are getting more. So the other mentor that I have is a UGO fisheries biologist by the name of Jay Shelton. And he's not really what I would call a fly time mentor. He's really more of a mentor on baitfish and other, the target species quarry, and how I can get flies that look like they look like and behave like they look. So these days I'm really just kind of fine tuning color schemes to mimic different species, and really kind of limiting the number of patterns that I'm playing with.
Got it. And so if folks wanted to get a closer look at your handful of patterns and wanted to buy some, where should they go?
Well, you might be able to go to this year's Inqua catalog and order tweakers. I do not know if it's going to make the deadline for production, but I signed off on the samples a few weeks ago, and they're awesome. So you should be able to get the tweakers in 3 different colors this year. And I do occasionally tie batches for Mike Schultz up at Schultz Outfitters for promotion stuff. And there's another fisheries biologist down here that just left Auburn University. It's named Hank Hershey, and he runs this little boutique shop called Hank's Bait Shop. And I'll do a batch every once in a while for him, but other than that, don't really sell flies. But I am happy to give you pointers, give you recipes, do all the stuff, and I'm working with Hank to try to get a video up about how to tie a quackhead on Southern Culture on the Fly here soon.
Yeah, Inside Baseball says that they're actually circling up the posse to work on the next issue here in the next week or so.
Awesome.
Yeah. And so one thing I always like to ask really serious tyers is if they have like one kind of nutty, unusual tool that they can't live without.
Absolutely. And that's the Hairline has a material stager that Drew Chacon designed, and it's literally just a piece of foam with a bunch of slits in it that you can, organize your material. And I'm pretty sure it was originally for production tyers where they could, lay out like 10 flies on one of these little foam blocks. But, fly tying for me is kind of 2 different things. One, it's this creative, analytical, problem-solving design process, and it's also meditation and kind of therapeutic. And the way that I kind of switch sides of my brain is, I'll do all my design and all my material layout and all that stuff. I need to use my non-creative side of my brain to kind of organize all that. And then once I kind of have everything laid out and organized and get up to the vise, have everything laid out when I'm hunting material or anything, I'm just wrapping stuff on and wrapping thread on top of that. It lets me kind of zone out and, get into a meditative state, just tie the bug. And so that tool allows me to do both instead of, kind of going back and forth, kind of not getting that focus that I get when I'm actually at the vise, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no. It totally makes sense. And, I mean, it's an amazing thing. Even if you're not tying a lot of flies, I mean, it's super productive to lay stuff out, and measure it. It makes things go a whole lot better. And, folks may not know, Fletcher, kind of your day jam is, you're the executive director of, and I'm going to make sure I get this right, the Altamaha Riverkeeper. Did I do it? Did I get it?
Yeah, you got it. The locals call it Altamaha, but, yeah, everyone else, Altamaha.
All right.
And it's a cool day job. If you don't know what river keepers are, started up in the Hudson River, up in New York with a bunch of fishermen that couldn't catch fish because the Hudson was so polluted. And so, they decided that they were going to go catch the polluters by letting permits. And at the time, state of New York would kind of pay a bounty. And so they kind of became pollution bounty hunters. And as they saw success and as the Hudson began to be shad run and striped bass again, you could start making their living. Other people wanted to replicate the program. And now there's a few hundred river keepers all around the world. We all are assigned a specific water body. And mine is the Altamaha Basin. And the Altamaha system is the third largest contributor of fresh water to the Atlantic. Very long river system, largely undammed from the fall line down, completely undammed. And it has an Atlantic drainage. It covers about a quarter of the state of Georgia. And what we primarily are designed to do is enforcement through utilizing the Clean Water Act. So we are designed to sue people, but that are polluting over their permit levels or explicitly polluting for permit. But we like to use all the other tools that are at our disposal to further our advocacy of a cleaner, more fishable river system. And so and I've been on that job since 2019, and we haven't sued anybody since. So that's kind of a last resort, but that's more or less what we're designed to do. So we lobby, we advocate, we do cleanup, work with other agencies to promote swimmable, drinkable, fishable water in the watershed. So even when I'm working, I've got a fishing rod either in the truck or in the boat with me. So I get a lot of little bits of fishing time here and there. Pretty cool job.
Very, very neat. And, what are some of the challenges that are currently facing your watershed?
We've got a couple of fairly large projects. The largest coal burning facility in the Western Hemisphere is in our watershed. And when you burn coal, you have a byproduct of waste called coal ash, and it's really nasty stuff. It's got uranium, radium, arsenic, lead, mercury, all kinds of awful stuff in it. And it's stored in ponds that are more or less pits that are submerged into the aquifer. And our EPA in 2015 created rules saying you got to dig that stuff up and store it in a lined landfill, or at least stored in a way that is not in contact with groundwater. And this specific plant is surrounded by residents that are drinking groundwater. And so it was a really bad situation. We have been able to successfully convince the county to put in water lines, but we're still fighting the power company on proper waste disposal. And that's the number one issue that we're dealing with. And then on a more positive note, we are hoping, and I don't know what date this show may air, we may have legislation by then, that we are in the final stages of creating a national park in Georgia, Georgia's first national park on the Ocmulgee River, right in the center of the two big shoal bass habitats. So that's been a really cool process. It's multi-agency, multi-municipality kind of group working together on this. And, that includes the Air Force Base and also one of the removed tribes from Georgia during the Trail of Tears, the Muskogee Creek Nation, will be a equal partner at the table with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the other partners with National Park Service. So that's a really cool, fun project that's kind of hopefully in the final stages. But, we do all kinds of stuff. It's what I tell people is it kind of like mowing grass with a push mower. It's, as soon as you get done, you got to do it all again. So some of it's Groundhog Day, but some of it's really fun, really moving the needle.
Yeah, that's neat. And if someone wanted to support your work, what can they do?
Best thing is donate and become a member.
Got it. And I will drop a link in the show notes. It's kind of funny you say that because here in Charlotte, it's like the spring fundraiser week for public radio. So perfect time to become a member.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
So before I let you go this evening, Fletcher, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
I think, get outside your comfort zone, try new stuff. If you're not a fly tyer, start. And, if some of these species are interesting to you or, no matter where you live, there's always something else to chase, something else to learn. And, no matter what your skill level is as an angler, don't let the ego get in the way of learning new stuff.
Very, very neat. And, what's the best way, Fletcher, for folks to kind of get in touch with you and follow your adventures at the Bison on the water?
Instagram.
And you want to share your handle?
At Fletcher.Sams.
Oh, there you go. That's pretty easy. And, Fletcher, I appreciate you spending some time with me this evening. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, man. I had a blast. Thanks.
Well, absolutely. Take care.
All right.
Well, folks, I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. And remember, if you like the podcast, please tell a friend and please subscribe and leave us a rating review in the podcatcher of your choice. And don't forget to check out the show notes for more information about the Chocolate Factory in Charlotte on May 4th. Tight lines, everybody.